The United States condemns the Houthis' latest attacks on Israel and supports Israel's right to self-defense. The Houthis launched an intense wave of attacks against Israel in December with no regard for civilian lives. One attack reportedly injured more than a dozen people on a playground in Tel Aviv. In view of the Houthis' continued attacks, the United States reiterates our call for this Council to consider additional actions to respond to the growing threats from the Houthis and to hold Iran to account. We can all see clearly that the Houthis are fully enabled by Iran to launch long-range and deadly attacks on Israel, including civilian infrastructure, as evidenced by the Houthis' propaganda boasting about the use of advanced hypersonic missiles. Iran's provision of these and other lethal weapons to the Houthis violates the arms embargo imposed on the group by this Council. It is the responsibility of this Council to respond to Iran's flagrant violations of its resolutions and arming of terrorist groups. Every member of this Council, and especially those with direct channels to Iran, should press Iran's leaders to stop the Houthis from launching attacks that put civilians in harm's way. We reiterate our call for this Council to take steps to strengthen the UN verification and inspection mechanism. UNVIM is a key means in ensuring arms and related material are not illicitly smuggled by Iran and other malign actors to the Houthis. For its part, the United States will not hesitate to protect its own personnel, regional partners, and international shipping. On December 16th, U.S. forces conducted a precision airstrike against a key command and control facility operated by Iran-backed Houthis within Houthi-controlled territory in Sana'a. The facility was a hub for coordinating Houthi operations, including attacks against U.S. Navy warships and merchant vessels in the southern Red Sea and Gulf of Aden. And during an operation on December 21st, U.S. forces shot down multiple Houthi one-way attack uncrewed aerial vehicles and an anti-ship cruise missile over the Red Sea. These actions were consistent with international law and were an exercise of the United States' inherent right to self-defense. They do not constitute a shift in our approach to other conflicts. It is also critical that Israeli military operations, especially in densely populated areas, be coordinated and conducted in a way that do not threaten the lives of civilians or civilian infrastructure. We are thankful to WHO Director General Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus and his team are safe after an Israeli strike on Thursday hit part of the Sana'a airport near where they were located. Dr. Tedros traveled to Yemen on behalf of the UN for work that we all believe is critical. We support the work that the UN and humanitarian partners, including the WHO, who are delivering critical health, nutrition, water, sanitation, and hygiene assistance to the people of Yemen, are doing while facing incredibly perilous circumstances. It is past time for the Houthis to cease their reckless and destabilizing behavior, and this Council should ensure that there are consequences for their actions. Colleagues, this is an especially dangerous moment in the region. It is imperative that we all work to reduce tensions. Just under 1 year ago, we joined together in adopting Resolution 2722 that demanded the Houthis immediately cease all attacks against merchant and commercial vessels. The United States looks forward to extending the resolution's reporting request for an additional 6 months to ensure the Council has accurate and timely information. We believe this reporting should also include information about the origin of ballistic missiles and advanced drones being used in the increasingly sophisticated attacks. We thank Japan for working with us on these resolutions and will look to incoming members of this Council for their support as well.
President, China deeply mourns the passing of the former U.S. President Jimmy Carter. He was a driving force and decision-maker in the establishment of diplomatic ties between U.S. and China, and made great contribution over the years to the bilateral relations and the friendly exchange and cooperation between the two countries. We highly commend his achievements. President, I thank S.G. Chiari for his briefing and listened carefully to the statement by the civil society representative. 2024 is coming to an end. It's a year of escalating conflict and confrontation and spreading tensions in the Middle East. Israel's savage bombing in Gaza has not stopped, not even for one moment, and the violent suppression in the West Bank has not ceased. The situation in Lebanon was turbulent and remains fragile. With drastic changes in Syria, its outlook is still unclear. As the year draws to a close, the situation in Yemen has begun to heat up rapidly. The Houthis frequently attacked commercial ships in the Red Sea, disrupting the order of international shipping and trade. The U.S. and Israel, among others, continue to launch airstrikes in Yemen, causing major casualties. The Houthis and Israel exchanged belligerent actions and rhetoric, further escalating the tensions. It is deeply worrying. In the face of ceaseless waves of instability in the Middle East and mutually provoking and escalating tensions, it is necessary for the Council to learn from experiences, strengthen unity and cooperation, strive to seek consensus, take effective actions, and find an integrated, comprehensive, and effective solution to the Middle East issue in the new year. We call upon parties to the conflicts in the Middle East to refrain from escalatory actions. The pressing priority is the end of fighting. The conflict in Gaza has dragged on far too long. An immediate and permanent ceasefire is a prerequisite for all work to proceed. The ceasefire between Lebanon and Israel is very fragile. The agreements reached must be effectively implemented. China calls on the Houthis to stop attacks of the commercial ships and other assaults, and calls on Israel and other relevant countries to cease airstrikes on Yemen. We call on countries in the Middle East to resolve differences and frictions through dialogue and consultation and achieve peaceful coexistence. Countries should respect each other's sovereignty and territorial integrity, legitimate rights to survival and development, and each other's reasonable security concerns. China supports regional countries in upholding a vision of common, comprehensive, cooperative, and sustainable security to jointly build a new and sustainable security architecture in the Middle East. We call on the international community to respect the choices of the people of the Middle East and support their countries achieving strategic autonomy. The Middle East is not a wrestling ground for major countries, nor can it become a victim of the geopolitical contest of non-regional countries. Relevant parties should fully respect the historical and cultural traditions of Middle Eastern countries and support these countries, including Syria, in achieving peace and reconciliation and finding a development path that suits their national conditions. On regional hotspot issues, we must respect the merits of the matter and stand up for fairness and justice, and support and assist regional countries in finding ways to resolve tensions and conflicts instead of picking sides or creating confrontations. We call upon international community to step up efforts for an early, comprehensive, just, and lasting settlement of the Palestinian question. As facts have repeatedly shown, the Palestinian question is at the heart of the Middle East issue, and only when the Palestinian question is completely resolved can there be true peace and stability in the Middle East. The international community should, with a race against time sense of urgency, reinvigorate the political prospect for the two-state solution. President, finally, I'd like to congratulate the U.S. in successfully completing the presidency of the Council. Taking this opportunity, I'd like to say my farewell to Ecuador, Japan, Malta, Mozambique, and Switzerland. elected members who are about to end their terms and welcome Denmark, Greece, Pakistan, Panama, and Somalia, which will be joining the Council soon. China looks forward to working with other Council members to practice multilateralism, build unity and consensus, and make efforts to enable the Council to better discharge its duties under the UN Charter in 2025. Thank you.
Madam President, we're grateful to ASG for the Middle East, Asia and the Pacific, Mr. Khaled Kiari, for his briefing. The situation in the Middle East is a cause for the gravest concern. Unprecedented in scope and length. The violence is not only not ending, but it's on the rise, unfortunately. More and more countries in the region are being sucked into this vicious circle. Yemen is no exception. Around Yemen, over the last 10 days, we've seen further escalation unfold. It's important to figure out the root causes, eschewing a one-sided interpretation of the situation, the degradation of which is being ascribed by our Western colleagues, including today, exclusively to the Ansar Allah movement. However, we shouldn't dismiss the broader context, because many hotspots of tension are today provoked by the actions of Israel against Palestinians, actions which are spurring rejection and condemnation on Arab streets. Madam President, the Houthis' launch of a missile towards Israel in the night of 19th to 20th of December, without a doubt, deserves our condemnation. As far as we know, this missile was intercepted by Israeli air defenses before it crossed the Israeli border, yet fragments did damage a school. Several more strikes followed. Thankfully, there were no casualties. We understand that such incidents involving missiles and UAVs at Israeli territory are sensitive for West Jerusalem. We'd like to re-emphasize the unacceptability of any actions which pose a threat to civilians and civilian infrastructure objects. Our sympathies go out to all those affected, including those affected as a result of the strike on Jaffa on the 21st of December. We hope they'll have a swift recovery. Yet the latest incidents following what happened on the 19th of December, including the reaction of Israel's military with the involvement of the US Navy and then the entire self-proclaimed Anglo-Saxon coalition in the Red Sea, is clearly not proportional. It also deserves our condemnation. As a result of massive strikes on Sana'a, the Yemeni capital, as well as Hadayda, Salif and Ras Isa, a minimum 9 people died. Fuel tanks, power stations and tugboats were attacked. A serious blow was dealt to port infrastructure. We're disquieted by reports circulated by the media, including the Israeli media, according to which the IDF Air Force attack on Yemeni ports was planned in advance, so that when, on the 19th of December, Houthis launched rockets, Israeli fighter jets were already in the air. Such circumstances require our careful assessment as a minimum. As a result of the last few days, Yemen was subjected to a genuine air attack. As a result of Israel's latest airstrikes with the support of the US, strikes on Sana'a and Yemeni Red Sea ports on the 24th of December, the following was subject to targeted attacks: oil terminals, power stations, and Sana'a International Airport, where a high-level WHO delegation was present at the time, led by WHO DG Dr. Ghebreyesus. It's a miracle that he came out unscathed, as according to his own witness account, facilities just a few meters away were destroyed. Due to the strike on the airport, a minimum 2 people died. 1 member of the crew transporting the delegation was injured. And, by the way, the delegation was in Sana'a to negotiate on the humanitarian situation in Yemen, including the issue of the release of detained UN personnel. In other words, the US and the UK were hypocritically calling for everything to be done for this personnel to be released. But then they put the lives of those UN negotiators who were trying to negotiate this release at risk. We call on everyone to listen to the SG's statement. He said that attacks on Sana'a and Red Sea ports endanger humanitarian operations in a serious way, at a time when millions of people in Yemen need this humanitarian assistance. It's difficult to characterize Israel's and the Anglo-Saxon coalition's actions as anything but a deliberate escalation, which resulted in casualties amongst civilians in Yemen. It's irrelevant whether these attacks were retaliatory. The scope of destruction is consummate and incommensurate. By the way, a similar logic can be seen in the context of Israel's military operation in the Gaza Strip, where, as a result of IDF actions, over 45,000 people have died, civilians. 45,000 civilians. The Israeli military leadership has openly stated its intent to continue its operation in Yemen, aiming to paralyze the activity of the three aforementioned ports, which remain the most important artery for the delivery of humanitarian consignments to the country. The ports are where many humanitarian workers are active. We call on all parties involved in aggressive actions being taken against Yemen to exercise restraint and to avoid escalatory action. We must also take steps to protect ordinary Yemenis and humanitarian workers. Madam President, January marks 1 year since the start of illegitimate military actions on the part of Western countries led by the US and the UK against the territory of sovereign Yemen. This self-proclaimed coalition, cynically titled Prosperity Guardian, isn't solving any problems, it's actually making them worse, sowing more and more destruction in this country as it's done in many countries before. Just last Friday, the US and its satellites again waged massive attacks on long-suffering Yemen. We call on Security Council members not to be misled. These attacks have nothing to do with the exercise of the right to self-defense pursuant to Article 51 of the UN Charter. They cannot be justified by international law nor UN Security Council Resolution 2722. The actions of this so-called coalition are a flagrant violation of Article 2 of the Charter. They are nothing but yet another military aggression being waged by the collective West against a sovereign state. The latest in a long list of such attacks. This attack not only does nothing to ease tensions surrounding Yemen, including turmoil in the Red Sea, it's actually spurring further escalation, on top of impeding progress on intra-Yemeni settlement. Yemeni problems should be resolved solely through diplomatic methods. We've been trying to convey this very simple idea to our colleagues on the Council. Unfortunately, some of them continue to pretend that they haven't heard what we've been saying. Madam President, the situation in Yemen is tending to further escalate, which ultimately can undo all of the hard-won progress on settlement issues. The key to resolving contradictions within Yemen and surrounding Yemen lies in promoting a process of inter-Yemeni settlement. As a first step, we must launch the implementation of the roadmap as soon as possible. The roadmap which was almost agreed with the participation of the UN and regional states. We're staunchly convinced that progress on the political track in Yemen will foster a reduction and ultimately a cessation of military activities on the part of Ansar Allah. On this note, we call the UN Secretary General's Special Envoy on Yemen, Hans Grunberg, to accelerate the necessary steps and to finalize the necessary arrangements. We see no grounds for linking the Yemeni settlement process with regional processes, nor do we see any reason for the Yemeni people to wait for comprehensive peace in the Greater Middle East, to have to wait before they begin to improve the situation in their own country. There is no alternative to an inclusive political process with due regard for the legitimate interests of all leading Yemeni political forces and a direct dialogue with the involvement of all protagonists, including Ansar Allah. Let me repeat what I said earlier. To achieve sustainable regional solutions and to avoid a repeat of flare-ups of violence, we mustn't lose sight of a key factor for the stabilization at a regional scale, a swift cessation of hostilities in Gaza, and a search for solutions for the long-term settlement of issues in Lebanon and Syria. On the whole, today more than ever, we need dialogue mechanisms which can foster healthier relations between countries in the region, which shouldn't, at the same time, ignore the basic issue, which is destabilizing the entire Middle East. An issue linked to the non-implementation of Security Council and General Assembly decisions regarding the establishment of a Palestinian state. When this happens, a sustainable solution will be found to myriad conflict situations, including ensuring the safety of navigation in the Red Sea region, which is something the Russian Federation is actively seeking. By way of conclusion, Madam President, we'd like to note the contribution of the outgoing elected members of the Security Council to the work of the Council, and we wish all the very best for the incoming elected members. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for his statement, and I shall now make a further statement in my capacity as a representative of the United States. And I just want to reiterate what I said in my earlier remarks as I reject the accusation of the representative of Russia. As I said previously, the United States will not hesitate to protect its personnel, regional partners, and international shipping. The actions taken by the United States have been consistent with international law and were in the exercise of our inherent right to self-defense.
Thank you, President, and I'd like to start by thanking ASG Chiari and Dr. Knights for their briefings today. President, the UK is deeply alarmed by the Houthis' continued missile and UAV attacks against Israel and their ongoing targeting of international shipping in the Red Sea. We strongly condemn these attacks, these reckless actions, and call on the Houthis to stop immediately. There is no justification for these attacks. Houthi aggression not only risks regional escalation, but is also making worse the already dire humanitarian and economic conditions inside Yemen. A comprehensive and inclusive political settlement remains the best route to a peaceful, stable, and prosperous Yemen. We're also clear on the role of Iran in fueling this escalation. Its long-standing financial and military support to the Houthis has enabled and exacerbated Houthi aggression. Iran bears responsibility for the actions of its proxies, and it must cease its illegal activity, which is destabilizing the region and threatening international peace and stability. President, the UK reiterates its support for Israel's right to self-defense in the face of Houthi attacks. However, Israeli action must be consistent with their obligations under international humanitarian law, including the protection of civilians. We are concerned by Israeli strikes on Yemen's civilian infrastructure, including the recent attack on Sana'a airport, which injured an UNHAS crew member and endangered the Director General of the World Health Organization and his team. Let me be clear. Humanitarians must be able to carry out their important work safely and securely. Director General Tedros was in Yemen to address the ongoing unlawful detention of humanitarian, NGO, and diplomatic staff by the Houthis. We are grateful to him and his team for their efforts, and we call on the Houthis now to fulfill their commitments and immediately and unconditionally to release all the detainees. Finally, I reiterate the UK's call for de-escalation and underline our commitment to ending the conflict in the region. Further bloodshed and suffering is in no one's interests. We must break the cycle of violence and deliver long-awaited peace and security for the people of the region. And in closing, Madam President, may I thank you for your chairmanship of the Council this month and thank our outgoing elected colleagues from Ecuador, from Japan, Malta, Mozambique, and Switzerland for your contributions. I thank you.
Madame la Présidente.
Madam President, I'm grateful to Mr. Carey and Mr. Knights for their interventions. France condemns the attacks conducted by Houthis against Israel in the past few weeks. France deplores the fact that in spite of numerous warnings by this Council, the Houthis, supported by Iran, continue to carry out hostile, destabilizing actions, in particular targeting commercial shipping in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden, and by targeting Israeli territory with missiles and drones. By doing this, they violate international law, including the resolutions adopted by this Council. And by doing that, they demonstrate their determination to escalate, which will never be in the interests of the Yemeni people or the people of the region. These actions must cease. France reiterates strongly its attachment to regional stability and to the security of Israel and the need to avoid any escalation in the region. France underscores the need to respect the principle of distinction and precaution and protect the personnel of the United Nations, humanitarian actors, and civilians in conformity with international humanitarian law. The Israeli strike against the airport of Sana'a on the 26th of December that wounded the co-pilot of UNHAS, responsible for transporting a high-level UN delegation, including the Director General of the WHO, is very concerning. France reiterates its support to UN agencies around very difficult conditions. This Council must remain mobilized to put an end to the policy of escalation of the Houthis supported by Iran, both in Yemen and the Red Sea and against Israel. It must ensure strict adherence to resolutions 2722 and 2739. The Galaxy leader and its crew must be released immediately. France will continue its involvement in the framework of the EU defensive operation ASPIDES, based on a strictly defensive approach, aiming at de-escalation in order to restore maritime security and freedom of navigation. Madam President, the attacks by the Houthis recall that only a political situation and the implementation of Resolution 2216 will make it possible to end hostilities and put an end to the suffering of the Yemeni people. France reiterates its full support to the Special Envoy of the United Nations with a view to resuming the peace process in Yemen. I would also like to thank Ecuador, Mozambique, Malta, and Switzerland for their contribution to the work of this Council for the past 2 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Mr. Chiari and Mr. Knight, for your valuable briefings. I would further like to thank the United States for their excellent presidency. Moreover, I would like to thank outgoing Security Council member Mozambique, Ecuador, Japan, Malta, and Switzerland, and welcome the new members Denmark, Greece, Pakistan, Panama, and Somalia. Recently, my phone buzzed with a notification that shocked me to my core. The school I myself attended as a child for 8 years, a place that shaped my earliest memories in my hometown, Ramat Gan, was struck by a ballistic missile launched by the Houthis. My own school in my own hometown. Its classrooms, once filled with the laughter of children, were forever changed by their terror. In another attack, a playground in Jaffa filled with children was struck, leaving a 3-year-old critically injured. Since then, the Houthi terrorists have been launching an endless bombardment of ballistic missiles at our population centers. Answer me honestly, what would you do if it were your child, your school, your city? Because this isn't just my story, it's Israel's story. And it's a story we are living every single day. We have had enough. Once again, millions of Israelis are waking up every night to the sound of sirens wailing across the country. Yet another ballistic missile launched by the Houthis, again and again and again. For over a year, this Iranian-backed terrorist organization has unleashed almost 300 unprovoked missile and drone attacks targeting Israeli civilians and communities. 300. This is systematic, calculated terror. Look at this map. Look at the distance between Yemen and Israel. Israel does not even share a border with Yemen. 2,000 kilometers separate us, 1,500 miles. 2,000 kilometers. We have no dispute with them. Yet they send their missiles and their drones to murder our people. And why? Pure radical jihadist hatred for Jews. This is no surprise. The Houthis proudly present their banner, which contains their slogan, and I quote, you can look it at their flags. It's called, God is the greatest, death to America, death to Israel, curse upon the Jews, and victory to Islam. Their violence is rooted in a burning hatred of Jewish life. Under the watch of this council, the Houthis have grown from a terrorist group into a terrorist army, all with the help of their Iranian paymasters. According to the UN's own experts, and you saw the documents, the Houthis now possess advanced ballistic missiles from Iran, including the previously unseen Khatam-2 ballistic missile, new UAVs also from Iran, increased technological expertise from Iran, and extensive training again from Iran. And what's the result? The number of Houthi terrorists has exploded to over 350,000, compared to just 30,000 in 2015. The Houthis are a crucial strand forming the web of terror that links Tehran's proxies. Iranian support for the Houthis violates Security Council Resolutions 2140 and 2722, and is an assault on all tenets of sovereignty and international law. Let's talk about money. The estimated Houthi annual budget is $1.2 billion, derived from illegal activities, bribes, stolen assets, and covert trade in the Gulf of Aden. Much of this funding also flows directly from Iran. However, Iran's support is not limited to arms and finance. Houthis receive technical assistance and training from Iran. Houthi combatants are trained in Iran, where they gain expertise in producing missiles, drones, and advanced weaponry. Training from Iranian forces, including the IRGC Quds Force, increases their ability to accurately target vessels in the Red Sea. We even have the names of the key Iranian officials involved in this terror training, and I'll give you the names. High-level Iranian advisors, such as General Rostam Qassami of the Quds Force and Major General Muhammad Ahmad al-Talibi. Both of them coordinate with Houthi leader Abdul Malik al-Houthi. Meanwhile, the UN's failure to enforce its arms embargo has directly enabled the Houthis' reign of terror. Their resilience on maritime supply lines from Iran remains unchecked. We heard about the port of Hodeidah, advanced missile systems, engines, fuel, and warheads are funneled through Houthi-held Red Sea ports. Yet the UN verification and inspection mechanism has failed in its responsibilities. We are aware of several ships which have docked at the port of Hodeidah this year without any inspection, blatantly violating Security Council resolution. This negligence sustains Iran's supply to the Houthis, fueling their terrorism. The international community's complacency has handed terror a free pass. We are now dangerously close to a situation where the Houthis completely strangling the Suez Canal, this critical route of global trade, relied upon by almost all nations, is under direct threat from a terrorist organization. The implications of such a scenario are unthinkable. President Sisi of Egypt revealed just days ago that the Egyptians' revenue from the canal has declined by 60%, which is a loss of almost $7 billion for a nation already facing economic challenges. Yet, the UN's failure to act has brought us to the brink of this disaster. It somehow gets worse. The Houthis do not spare anyone, not even the children of Yemen. In just the first half of 2024, Yemen's government documented over 3,000 cases of child recruitment into the terrorist group. Your silence has emboldened them. If you think the Houthis are only our problem, you are wrong. Security Council reports document their attacks on Middle Eastern vessels. 134 attacks on merchant ships, commercial vessels, and US and UK warships between November 2023 and July 2024. Ships are constantly under attack. I'll give you a few examples. The Sea Champion was sunk in February. 3 crew members of the True Confidence were murdered in a missile attack. To this day, 25 crew members of Galaxy Leader are still held captive. UN experts stated that such attacks using these weapons against civilian ships had not been seen since, and I quote, World War II. Since World War II. It is time the world wakes up. A terror group attacking trade routes, collaborating with global terror networks, and armed by Iran is not just a regional threat. It is a grim warning for the world order. They have been given a green light for terror. But let's truly address the elephant in the room. Iran. Distinguished Council members, the Houthis are nothing more than Iran's weapon in its war against peace. Iran's fingerprints are on every missile, every drone, every attack. Military experts confirmed the Houthis could not achieve their capabilities without Iran's direct support. Their transformation into a terrorist army is Tehran's doing. Yemen's chairman of the Presidential Leadership Council has pleaded for action against Iran's funding of the Houthis. Madam President, we have come to this council not just to address the threats posed by the Houthis, but to challenge the double standards that hangs over this body. Some nations here preach the values of international law and human rights while turning a blind eye to those who violate these very principles with impunity. Madam President, we have listened to the briefers. We have all heard about what this terrorist organization is doing. Will the Council condemn the Houthis today? You know, we all heard bad things about them, but there will be a condemnation. What we are doing here today? You know, the Secretary General, he calls for both sides to de-escalate as if we are moral equals. And the Security Council cannot issue a basic condemnation against a terrorist organization. Israel will not wait for the world to act. Israel will protect its citizens, no matter how far the threat comes from. If you didn't speak up when our schools were hit, don't speak up when we respond. Don't call for de-escalation when we defend ourselves. Don't equate aggressor and victim. Don't demand restraint from a nation protecting its children. Israel has always acted with strength and resolve to protect its people, and we will not be deterred. If 2,000 kilometers is not enough to separate our children from their terror, it will not be enough to protect their terror from our strength. Our response will continue to be strong and decisive, and it will send a clear message to all who dare to harm our citizens. Israel will not hesitate, and Israel will not forgive. To the Houthis, perhaps you have not been paying attention to what has happened to the Middle East over the past year. Well, allow me to remind you what has happened to Hamas, to Hezbollah, to Assad, to all those who have attempted to destroy us. Let this be your final warning. This is not a threat. It is a promise. You will share the same miserable fate. Thank you, Madam President.